One decision during the war changed everything. The mistake was not on the battlefield, but a strategic choice. For a moment, that same dishonest combat. Everything begins with a misunderstanding of success. Hitler's early victories created the illusion that bold decisions alone could win wars. Freinfeld convinced him that instinct was stronger than long-term planning. Rapid victories can distort judgment. Germany's early campaign forms worked because of precise coordination between tanks, aircraft, logistics, and Hitler interpreted Gallons of Bring and Lang. He would have made that possible. Germany's economy was never designed for a prolonged global conflict. Oil supplies were limited. Industrial depth was narrow, napredvities that would later depose Germanists. After France collapsed, the war should have paused for Germany. But Britain, protected by sea power, refused to surrender. Hitler expected defeat, but Britain prepared for a prolonged struggle. Germany launched a massive air campaign intended to break Britain's defenses. Early attacks targeted radar systems and fighter airfields, but the focus suddenly shifted and allowed Britain's fighter command to recover. Germany also misunderstood the nature of sea power. Britain survived because supplies, fuel, and weapons continued arriving across oceans. If that had control of the sea, Britain remained connected to the world. The Freinfeld campaign briefly threatened Allied castles, and submarine assembly gap recamp. Afghan forces on wide support ships, aircraft patrols, and improved with detection technology. Hitler's next decision changed the scale of the entire war. Instead of finishing the conflict in the West, he turned east and invaded the Soviet Union. This opened the largest land campaign in human history. Hitler believed the Soviet Union would collapse quickly. Early battles captured huge numbers of prisoners and territory. But the Soviet state did not collapse. It absorbed the losses. Geography soon began to punish German strategy. Supply lines stretched hundreds of kilometers across damaged roads. Fuel, ammunition, and spare parts moved slower than the advance of Sigarni. Germany also faced a hidden logistical obstacle. Incompatible discipline. In the reds with really sly were wires were the Batman dreads. Ori Jatafaf were many expected. Hitler struggled to prioritize objectives, dividing his armies in each fordable capital city, stroll forces toward the political capital, southern Ireland advance and industrial regions, weakening the overall momentum. The debate over Moscow became one of the most critical strategic disagreements. Some commanders believed to no objectives. Hitler's nation lands the Moscow were a crucial moment. The arrival of winter is often blamed for Germany's defeat in the east, but winter alone did not destroy the German army again. Problem was that leaders expected the campaign to end before winter arrived. Another major miscalculation was the belief that Soviet resistance would collapse. After massive losses, millions of soldiers were captured, yet new Soviet armies kept appearing.
Ideology began to interfere directly with military strategy.
Hitler viewed the Eastern War not only as a military campaign but as a racial struggle. This decision led to brutal policies against civilians and prisoners. Many regions in Eastern Europe had suffered under Soviet control before the German invasion. Some civilians initially hoped the arrival of German forces might change their situation. Another enormous strategic mistake soon followed. After Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, Hitler chose to declare war on the United States. This decision was not required by any treaty obligation at that moment. Modern wars are often decided by production and supply. The United States possessed enormous industrial capacity. Once American production joined British resilience and Soviet manpower, the balance of power shifted permanently. Germany now faced a long war against opponents with larger populations and greater industrial capacity. At this stage, survival required careful conservation of resources and defensive strategy. One of the most damaging command decisions occurred during a major battle in a ruined industrial city on the Eastern Front. German forces became sent after advancing to withdraw. Hitler refused. The surrounded army was ordered to hold its position while waiting for supplies to arrive by air. But the scale of the trapped force was far larger. The encircled army could sustain under pressure. The destruction of this entire army shocked both sides of the war. It proved that German forces were not invincible. It weakened Germany's ability to maintain offensive operations in the east. Hitler's command style involved direct interference with battlefield decisions. He refused trop inoffensive patrols. Military can mam possible situations. As the war continued, Germany's enemies grew stronger while its resources shrank. Soviet industry expanded deeper inside protected regions, allied by German aircrafts. The balance of production moved steadily against Germany. The war extinguished larger numbers. Factories previously still built powerful numbers, and numbers numbers, and now long these against the repriver. Germany's fuel situation was becoming dangerously fragile. Oil fields available to Germany could not meet the nabling demand of tanks, aircraft, of fuel sporvies. Allied air forces gradually gained control of the skies. A two-way campaign run Stapadistampa targeted transportation of fuel outwaste and waste. Military training also began to suffer. Experienced pilots and soldiers were lost faster than they could be replaced. New recruits received shorter training before combat, reducing the overall effectiveness of Germany's armed forces.
Another legislation ensure alle Davischen die Frontes Germano. Examtium fast engagement to Frabischen ink two powerful enemies approaching from opposite sides.
Germany was now fighting a war on multiple fronts at the shrinking resources. Armies in the west were fighting under constant French, while Fortune's situation is tightening like a slowly closing ring. Hitler refused flexible defense. Commanders recommended shorter lines to concentrate strength, but he ordered forces to hold large territories, stretching units thin. By this stage, the war had transformed into a battle endurance. Germany's enemies could replace das destroyed Captain lost or strength. Every nature's drama sting collect. Hitler increasingly relied on hope for dramatic reversals rather than realistic planning. New experimentally Nature, but could not compensate for shortages of fuel, trained personnel, and strategic position. The final phase of the war revealed the cumulative effect of every decision. Skam Uralsens Handtorning or Kontrakladen, as cities and countries have retumantly to Germany's enemies. By this stage, Germany was no longer choosing the direction of the war. The initiative had completely shifted to its enemies. Allied armies now decided where and when battles would occur. Transportation networks inside Germany were under constant strain. Repeated bombing damaged railways, bridges, and roads. Even when weapons were produced successfully, delivering to the front line became increasingly hard. German air power, once dominant, now struggled to defend the homeland. Fuel shortages limited training and missions. Experienced pilots were hard to replace, and control of the skies shifted to the Allies. As defeat approached, Hitler's leadership became increasingly rigid, often ignoring battlefield reports. Units were ordered to hold indefensible positions, leading to encirclements and losses Germany could not afford. The war was now closing in from every direction. Allied first danced from the west, while whilst armies non pushed steadily in the Gast. Germany's territory was shrinking rapidly. By the later stages of the war, Germany's defensive lines were being pushed back across vast distances. Each shrinking territorial line found fewer resources to sustain the military effort. Germany's ability to replace equipment was now collapsing. Factories still produced weapons, but shortages of raw materials slowed production. Oil, metals, and industrial components became increasingly difficult to obtain as supply routes were cut off. Communication between leadership and the battlefield deteriorated. Reports described desperate conditions, yet orders from above demanded resistance without considering the limitations of exhausted units. This gap weakened the military structure. Allied air superiority allowed constant surveillance and attacks against transportation routes. This forced German units to move cautiously and slowed reinforcement efforts across the front lines. By this point, the outcome of the war was becoming clear. Germany's enemies controlled greater manpower, economies, and Weifstarter access, and defined their Rangspans to approaching. By the final phase of the war, German leadership had lost the ability to control events strategically. Decisions were increasingly reactive, while German forces determined to hold collapsing operations. Transportation within Germany was under extreme pressure. Railways, bridges, and roads were damaged by bomb mound. Even when supplies existed, moving to supported rapid camp dangers was failing. German air defense was weakening rapidly. Fuel was scarce, pilot training shortened, and experienced crews hard to replace. Enemy bombers now operated with increasing freedom. Control of the air had shifted decisively. Leadership inside Germany still. Units were ordered to defend cities and positions regardless of the military situation. Many commanders understood that some locations strategically valued and ran and cringed. Germany was now surrounded by advancing forces from multiple directs, while Allied armies were and Casse rejoining to control. This Ganier circladly and this now unfolded rapidly. Germany's defensive system was now accelerating in collapse. Units were forced to retreat again and again, often without enough fuel, vehicles, or equipment. Every retreat revealed how much strength had already been lost. By this stage, Germany had lost control of many resources that supported its war effort. Industrial regions and agricultural areas fell under enemy control, weakening their supply capacity. German soldiers now faced overwhelming pressure from larger enemy formations. Highlight continued arriving with new equipment and steady supply lines. German formations often fought with limited ammunition, fuel, and impossible to reverse. Hitler still hoped for dramatic reversals that could change the outcome of the war. Plans to sprinter possessed tekradimi shifted, and Germany knows that is required a war how strategic initiative. The final months of the war reflected the cumulative effect of every earlier mistake. Overextension, ideological decisions. By the closing phase of the war, Germany's military structure was no longer operating as a coordinated system. Many units fought isolated battles while larger strategic control continues to fade. The war had now become a race between advancing armies and collapsing infrastructure. Rail lines were damaged, roads were crowded with retreating vehicles, and supply depots were shrinking rapidly.
German cities were now under constant pressure from the air.
Repeated bombing raids disrupted production and weakened transportation networks. Factories still attempted to operate, but the industrial system was fragmenting under continuous attack. By this point, many German commanders understood the war could no longer be won, yet orders from leadership continued demanding resistance in every region. Units were told to defend positions even when strategic value disappeared. The outcome of a war was not decided by one battle alone. It was shaped by years of cumulative Streitkriegen. Each faced Germany covered and slowly removed the foundations that sustained those victories. The war revealed the limits of leadership based on personal belief rather than structural reality. And strategic planning requires understanding arson, powerful army begin to weaken. Historians continue to study the many factors behind Germany's defeat: industrial imbalance, logistical strain, ideological policies, and leadership princes acted over full years of war. Some of Hitler's decisions were driven by ideology, others by impatience, and others by misjudgment of enemy strength. Over time, those narrowing paths led toward a strategic dead end. Military power alone does not determine victory. Sustainable logistics, flexible strategy, and realistic leadership are equally essential. When those foundations weaken, even the strongest offensives eventually slow and collapse. The defeat of Nazi Germany was not caused by a single dramatic mistake. It was the result of many decisions that slowly undermined the strength of the system so it fell. If this analysis revealed history's turning points, let's continue. Thought to stand years keep discourse alive, help us in schwanning. If this was valuable, help us to favorite. Stay connected to learn.